together here at the MAC to share your memories and celebrate Lyndsay's wonderful life. This venue has been chosen as it is where Lyndsay's children spent time in the park and at the Arts Centre, creating and performing in their younger years. And it became the local cinema and venue for many cultural events for Lyndsay and Torna in their later years. So, many memories have been made here. For those of you who weren't at Waisley Hills with us earlier, I'd just like to mention that should you wish to make a donation in Lyndsay's memory, then you will be supporting Cancer Research UK and the Alzheimer's Society. And his family have raised enough money between them to sponsor a seat here at the MAC in his name. There is a collection box on the table there if you're wondering where it is. All of you here, whether joining us in person or online, will have countless memories of your Lyndsay. You will have met him at different times in his life, either as a family member, friend or colleague. The memories that you have will be precious to you and will bring you great comfort in the future, especially when you share them with others. Lyndsay was very musical. He played the flute and the piano, and he sang with the Choral Union and Birmingham University Choir. Therefore feels very fitting indeed that we begin his celebration with a rendition of When the Music Starts to Play, sung by the Birmingham Choral Union.
We're not the entire Birmingham Choral Union. We are a select bunch of the Birmingham Choral Union. Very select. Okay?
here as well. And there's one over there. There's one over there. Can we go round? It would be impossible to share all of Lyndsay's lifetime today, but we hope to give you some snippets from different times and different parts of his life. At Waisley Hills earlier, Philip talked about Lyndsay's most important role as a husband, father and grandfather. So this afternoon we will focus on his childhood, work and friendships, and begin with memories of Lyndsay's younger years. These come from Josephine, Dorothy and Pat. Lyndsay Gordon Earwarker was the only son of William, originally from Poplar, and Ellen Carey of Scots heritage. Sadly, his sister Judith Ann was stillborn. He was born in New Zealand on Friday the 18th of February 1938 and lived on the family's chicken farm. Lyndsay's father had settled in New Zealand after a period in the Navy and encouraged all of his relatives to move abroad too. So whilst Lyndsay was an only child, the family was surrounded by lots of relatives. Sadly, Lyndsay's father died when he was just 16. Campbell was Lyndsay's best friend, and along with his sister Josephine, they all grew up together, went to school together, rode their bikes together, enjoyed Guy Fawkes night together, and spent many happy hours at the farm. Josephine remembers riding on a big wooden wheelbarrow that was full of buckets of chicken food that Don Edmonds used to push around to the different chicken houses, feeding the chickens. She also recalls Lyndsay's mother making her own butter and ice cream and having to separate the milk after the cow had been milked. The children helped with the washing by putting the clothes through the wringer. Other fond memories include watching the chicks hatch in the incubators, the odd party they had with all the neighbours and Lyndsay playing the piano. Josephine recalls that Lyndsay was such a very clever person, brilliant at school, a real scholar, unlike her and Campbell, who she says were never that smart. Campbell remembers one occasion when they knocked on the farmhouse door. Mrs. Earwarker answered and Campbell asked if Lyndsay could come out to play. "Not now, he has a book to read." Mrs. Earwarker replied. "Gee," said Campbell, "I can't even read yet," making everyone laugh. Campbell also recalls how he and Lyndsay went to Christchurch on a Scout jamboree together, paid for by Lyndsay's mother. They had so much fun there and made many happy memories together. The friendship Lyndsay and Campbell created was so precious to Lyndsay, and in recent times he had a longing to see Campbell again. Don was Lyndsay's cousin, or one of the many, who for some time lived with Lyndsay on the farm. Their relationship was more like that of brothers than cousins. In later years, on visits to New Zealand, Lyndsay and his family would stay with Don. Don's daughter Dorothy has recorded a video for us to share with you all now. And I don't think we've got that with us.
It's not. Well, I didn't organise it. Is it on the email?
Bear with us.
Yes. Are we able to attach a phone to...
I'm going to carry on,
Carry on.
and they'll have a little mother-daughter chat while I'm doing that. The youth group at Knox Presbyterian Church in Parnell, as well as the local tennis club, were an important part of Lyndsay's life. Many of the people he met there became friends for life, visiting Lyndsay and his family here in the UK, and the family visiting them when in New Zealand. Pat met Lyndsay at the start of the 1960s at the church, when he attended the evening service with his mum and aunt. Pat has a few memories for me to share with you. The first one is that Lyndsay would refuse to attend a function with his mum if a friend or relative would be there who wore a silly beaded hairnet. He hated it. When Lyndsay finished his degree, there wasn't anything for him in New Zealand, so he had to leave for Australia, and later the USA, and then the UK. Pat recalls that it was announced at a service they would be losing Lyndsay as he was moving overseas, and his poor mum rushed out of the church in tears as she was so upset that she was losing her boy. There were several young ladies who were also quite upset. He was quite a dish. When Lyndsay's friend Peter married Pat, Lyndsay sent a card of good wishes. It said there were 3 rings in marriage: engagement ring, wedding ring, and suffering. Pat also recalls a letter Lyndsay sent when working in England. In it, he wrote to say how excited he was as he could now have use of the university computer on a Saturday for an hour. And in another, he told them of his meeting this lovely girl, Torna. He told them that this lovely girl was a physiotherapist. And no, he didn't get wonderful massages, as hers were quite hard going. Having left New Zealand, Lyndsay arrived in Canberra. Lyndsay was installed in University House, where all the PhD students lived, ate all their meals together and formed friendships across many subjects. This led to a great social life, and many friends became friends for life. Together they had great adventures. They also played football, and as Martin Dunwoody remembers, Lyndsay was a good friend, especially during the 3 years I spent in Canberra. We both played for the ANU soccer team. Lyndsay played as goalkeeper or centre half. We went up to Brisbane to compete in the Australian University tournament. We went via Sydney by train, which took more than a day. I remember being soundly beaten by the University of New South Wales. Laurel Simmons, also a part of this group of lifelong friends, has some of her memories from Canberra. Lyndsay was one of my oldest friends. I first met him in Canberra when he moved into University House at the Australian National University in 1961. I was living there and was already working as a research assistant in the physics biochemistry department, but he had come from Auckland to study for a PhD in nuclear physics. Lyndsay fitted in well with all of us students and workers. He was one of the boys, and we played an occasional game of tennis together. In 1963, I married Jeff Simmons, one of those boys, and I remember that Lyndsay came to our wedding in Canberra. Canberra is also where Lyndsay made his first connection to Birmingham, because his supervisor had come out from Birmingham University. Then, at the end of his PhD, a whole bunch of the scientists went by ocean steamer to California. One night at sea, they were all gathered having after-dinner drinks. Suddenly, someone said, "We need another round. Can we have the same again, please?" "Yes, certainly," came the reply from the waiter, who, without taking any notes at all, returned with the exact and complicated order and proceeded to serve everybody the right drink. Lyndsay was so impressed and never forgot this impressive feat of memory. He had lots of adventures, visiting all the national parks in California and even down to Mexico with friends. And just yesterday, a friend called Don Mingay sent this through to Torna. I sadly do not have any pictures of times that we shared while at Caltech in 1964, but Bess records that an unusual alliance of 3 foreigners was founded there, who enjoyed short touring trips together to local sites such as the Grand Canyon, Zion, Bryce Canyon, Yosemite, Redwoods, and on one memorable day, both skied on snow on Mount Baldy in the morning to then drive down to Santa Monica and swim in the Pacific in the afternoon. An unholy alliance of 3 nuclear physicists, Miko Liebenstein, 5 few, a short tank commander from Israel, myself, 5'9", a sportsman from South Africa, and Lyndsay, 6 many. A good on you sport from New Zealand. When we camped, our backpacks were stored in the space at Mika's feet. I filled the length and Lyndsay had his feet outside of the small tent. We shared a most memorably diverse and yet consistent set of experiences and stories 62 years ago that are never to be forgotten. In more recent years, Lyndsay and Torna revisited a lot of these places together. Laurel was also with Lyndsay at the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena and recalls the trip to Mexico. We all joined on a trip to Mexico organised by Pasadena Rotary Club, and I remember Lyndsay complained that I didn't acknowledge that his car was immediately behind ours for miles as we drove through the desert. Another memory she shared was of the night Lyndsay visited them in their upstairs apartment and lost his footing as he was leaving. They heard some loud thumping and opened the door to see Lyndsay on his bottom at the foot of the stairs. Fortunately, he wasn't hurt. Lyndsay was a young post-grad in California when Professor Richard Feynman was awarded his Nobel Prize, and he attended the celebratory dinner. Earlier, at Waisley Hills, Torna shared a poem that Professor Feynman had written. There is one additional memory that Rex recalls. This memory is about Lyndsay and his sense of humour. It cannot be said that he was adept at telling jokes. That did not mean that he did not appreciate one. He told me of one that involved a fellow physicist. This story involves Richard Feynman, who is perhaps the greatest of the modern ones. The scene to imagine is a group of students gathered around a television in a Californian university. The landing of a man on the moon was just taking place. Richard came up behind them, unseen by the students. Seeing what they were watching, he said in a loud voice, "So, what is the moon made of?" Dead silence. Nobody wanted to make a fool of themselves in front of this great man. "Why," said Professor Feynman, "it is made of cheese, of course." The group of friends from Canberra who went to California together then all went to Europe at similar times, mainly England and Scotland, which meant that Lyndsay arrived home to England, as they would have said in New Zealand at the time, with an already established friendship group. Mimosa Close is where Lyndsay shared a house with 5 young lecturers, and it played a significant part in his life. When Torna arrived in Birmingham in 1968, Lyndsay was living in Mimosa Close. Torna was taken to a party by a nurse friend at the hospital, and she recognised a person who was from the shared house in Mimosa Close. They got chatting, which led to an invitation to the next party at the house. Torna went along and met Lyndsay for the first time. They each had their own lives at the time, but Torna remembers Lyndsay being so excited about having just returned from a visit to New Zealand. He had been home. The charter flight had cost him a month's wages. All the members of Mimosa Close became friends, and there were lots of social gatherings at parties, meetings in pubs, etc. Torna particularly remembers sometimes on a Sunday being invited for a roast dinner that Philip Bertrand would organise from leftovers at the butcher's on Saturday afternoon. Also, every summer they put on a strawberry party. They would go to the fields and pick the strawberries. Torna had never seen such huge bowls of strawberries. She fondly recalls what a lovely time they all had together. Torna told me that it was a case of love at later sight. As we have heard, they already knew each other from their friendship group, when they then met by chance in town by the cathedral. The fact that Lyndsay had a Thornton's toffee stuck in his teeth didn't stop him from inviting himself for a coffee the next evening, and from that moment on, they were destined to be together. Torna fell in love with the gentle, kind art appreciator who always had a beard. As we have heard, Laurel first met Lyndsay in Canberra and he became one of her oldest friends. She recalls how they met again in England when Lyndsay invited her, Jeff and their 2 children to stay overnight with him in Oxford so they could join in the excitement of the May morning at Magdalen Bridge the next day. Laurel and Jeff then returned to Canberra for a few years, but having returned to the UK they visited Chedworth Roman Villa, where they bumped into Lyndsay, who had a lovely girl hanging around his neck, Torna. The 4 adults became instant friends and enjoyed many happy times together. In particular, Laurel recalls a memorable meeting in 2018 in Melbourne, when the Earwarkers and Simmons met at the Jenkins house to celebrate the 3 former students' 80th birthdays. Laurel ends her memories by saying what a pleasure it has been to know and love Lyndsay over so many decades. Now, whilst Laurel recalled a young girl hanging around Lyndsay's neck, Joanna and Rex remember the early days of Lyndsay and Torna's friendship, when the tall, striking couple in matching Norwegian sweaters, walking hand in step around Bourneville, could seem a little intimidating from a distance. But it was never long before the warmth and welcome of their friendship and their ready hospitality shone through. Eventually, the owners of the house in Mimosa Close returned from their years abroad, and everybody had to find their own place to live. By then, Leslie and Torna had found each other properly, and Lyndsay bought a house in St Dennis Road for them to live in, which is where they will become part of another amazing circle of friends. Together, they created their legacy. 3 children and 4 grandchildren. But Lyndsay's life was made up of so many different parts. The most important, of course, were his family. And we heard earlier about his musical accomplishments too. But he was also a traveller and adventurer, a tennis player, a lover of afternoon tea, and last but definitely not least, a physicist. A quick Google of his name will show how important his work was, alongside the numbers of papers he published. Rex recalls an early discussion with Lyndsay. The subject was radiation. Lyndsay shared his conviction that the structures surrounding the experiments and production of nuclear energy were safe. In a rare moment, he gave Rex examples of the work already accomplished in various buildings and plants around the world, to ensure there remained no risk of contamination to any person or the environment following experiments involving the emission of radiation. Rex reflects that perhaps in these days of fossil fuel wars, more of our educated scientists should speak out with confidence on the subject of nuclear energy and better inform the debate. As you will hear now, David was one of Lyndsay's colleagues, so he is able to give us an insight into the fascinating work that Lyndsay was involved in.
Thank you, Tonna. It's a real honour to be able to say a little bit about my friend and former colleague from the physics department at the University of Birmingham. Around 1970, Lyndsay was appointed to the staff of the newly created Radiation Centre in Birmingham, which was a unique institute jointly funded by the two universities of Birmingham and Aston, intended to provide a variety of radiation facilities for all sorts of interdisciplinary studies. Lyndsay's particular responsibility was the 3 million volt dynamitron, a low energy but high current particle accelerator which was commissioned in the early 1970s. The dynamitron, for those of you who haven't seen it, was a major facility which took up most of the radiation centre building. It had a number of different target stations used for all sorts of different things, as well as producing ion beams of hydrogen and helium. It could also be used to generate fast neutrons. In simple terms, what this means is that Lyndsay worked with advanced nuclear technology and nuclear techniques, but applied them to study and importantly to support others in studying a whole variety of phenomena and problems in materials science and engineering, all sorts of other disciplines. My own career followed a rather similar line, so I know from personal experience how unrewarding it could be. This was unglamorous, often thankless work. People are quick to complain when a facility does not work properly, much slower to voice appreciation when it does. Lyndsay, I know, bore all this with great patience and cheerfulness. Over the years, Lyndsay supervised a number of PhD students, including among them Jackie Cole and Julian Simpson, who were both students of Lyndsay's together in the early 1980s. Sadly, Jackie and Julian, who ended up marrying each other, cannot be with us today, but they have sent me an appreciation. Jackie and Julian thank Lyndsay for doing a sterling job of guiding both of them through the trials and tribulations of their respective research areas, while providing a great deal of freedom in terms of where their research took them. Lyndsay, they say, was part of what was one of the happiest periods of their lives. They enjoyed several trips abroad together under the banner of conferences, notably trips to West Berlin in 1985, that's before the wall came down, Denton, Texas in 1986. That visit included a slightly crazy tour, Jackie says, of various US labs, which they went their different ways at particular times. Jackie remembers that trip particularly because of the difficulties associated with trying to meet up, having travelled via different routes in days long before mobile phones. Jackie spent several hours at Albuquerque Airport waiting for Lyndsay to appear, watching the notice board, counting down all the flight arrivals, eventually saying there were no further flight arrivals, being acutely aware that the airport was shutting down all around her and that she had no idea of the onward travel plans. And Jackie remembers with great relief, with surprise, when Lyndsay eventually appeared through the arrivals gate. It's a reminder of the difficulties of travel in those days. Jackie and Julian both left Birmingham around 1987 but were very pleased that Lyndsay and Torna and family were able to attend their wedding with Anne-Marie as one of the bridesmaids. And they still treasure the blue elephant which was given as their something blue at their wedding, which now serves as a reminder of a very long-standing friendship. Lyndsay's formal teaching was largely confined to the master's course in applied radiation physics. On the retirement of Saeed Durrani in the early 1990s, Lyndsay took over running that particular MSc program. Around the same time, I was asked to help create a variant of that program specialising in medical physics, a variant which eventually became a separate MSc program in medical and radiation physics. So along with the very long-standing master's course in the physics and technology of nuclear reactors, which was run by David Weaver, the School of Physics had for a long time 3 MSc programs, and they shared quite a lot of core teaching. Lyndsay took on the role of coordinator for all 3 of those programs. I remember it was a time of constant pressure when we found ourselves regularly having to defend the values of these master's programs against those who wanted the School of Physics to concentrate more on undergraduate teaching. In looking through my files, I found a memo that I wrote to Lyndsay and David in early 1995, preparing our input for a review of MSc programs which was being carried out. In that memo I wrote, "We should try to word this as positively as we can. Lyndsay is good at this." That, to me, sums up Lyndsay. In the face of all sorts of problems and opposition, Lyndsay, I think, was always calm, unflappable, and positive. The generation of Birmingham Master's students owe Lyndsay a great debt for the way he kept those programs running. In later years, Derek Bainan, who had become head of the Applied Physics Group, took the decision that the dynamitron accelerator should become exclusively a source of neutrons for a novel form of cancer therapy. Lyndsay did his best to support that transition, though I suspect his heart was never entirely in it. His last few years at the university contained more than their fair share of problems. But it's greatly to Lyndsay's credit that in total the dynamitron accelerator operated for well over 40 years. It finally decommissioned only in 2023. But Lyndsay's legacy to the university lives on in the form of the current particle accelerators there, especially the new ADNIF facility, which has replaced the dynamitron as an accelerator-driven source of neutrons. Students and researchers, past and present, have very much to thank Lyndsay for, and I personally am very grateful for his support over the years.
As I mentioned earlier, Lyndsay joined the local tennis club, eventually becoming their treasurer. Another member was Henry, who along with his wife Jean became the founding members of the Earwarkers, more on which Jean will share with us now.
Hello. I might say my husband Henry met Lyndsay on the Shannon in Ireland when they were both on a river cruise holiday with friends. That was in late 60s. But the Sellywick walkers began later. After especially enjoying walks in family weeks at the University of Birmingham Field Centre and Coniston in the Lake District, because we had leaders who knew the way, Henry and I decided we would take the plunge and see how many would join us if we started a walking route back in Birmingham. We've walked a lot over the years, often using local newspaper articles by Richard Shurry, who became known to us all as Richard Slurry because he led us into so many muddy places. It wasn't always easy to find the best route. How marvellous it would be to have someone else to blame. Then Henry got cold feet and said it would be too difficult, too time-consuming to run, and vetoed it. I was miffed, to say the least, and proposed that members could take it in turns to choose and run the walk, after practicing it first if necessary. Afterwards, the leaders would provide tea, and we would talk and decide who would lead the next walk. So on January 17th, 1999, we held a suitable boozy walkers' wassail, and the club was born, with about 18 members. Over the next 20 or so years, we walked every month, 8 or 9 times a year. But the one I remember best was the first on St. Valentine's Day to Malvern Hills. I quote here from a member's description. It was a very, very awful day, I might say. Finally, we find Malvern beacons, which seems to require a symbolic act of some kind. So we stand in a freezing circle in a ferocious gale and unwrap our sandwiches. Lyndsay tells us it's hot in Canberra. At the tea party after the walk, we accepted the Earwarker's offer to lead the second walk. When the details were circulated, Lyndsay had included a map first, and something which became a very valuable part. A walk in late September provided another theme. We collected lots of sloes, which were converted into sloe gin. At the following year's group tasting, Turner and Lyndsay's was one of the best, thank you. The next innovation was in April 2002, a walking weekend away in Monmouth Travel Lodge, stopping on the way at Simmons Yacht to see the peregrine falcons and their chicks. Many such outings followed, Monmouth again, Kettlewell twice, and Harlech twice. Our first Harlech base was at the Colleague Harlech WEA, Crown Lodge. This was to be our only experience to include an expert walking guide. He sent us detailed instructions for the Birmingham to Harlech journey. No use. Heavy rain caused extensive flooding, so we drove wherever was possible and arrived there quite late. On our guided walk, when confronted by very angry farmers, I seem to remember the expert walking guide hiding at the back, and we decided to trust ourselves again. Our most ambitious outing was in 2002, the Sellywick Walkers French Adventure, chez Earwarker, Lyndsay. Fired up, Henry and I offered vacances heureuses en heureuses, considerably less swish. A most memorable holiday ensued. Another great French adventure, staying with Hélène at her summer home in Normandy, included swimming in the sea, warmed by, as Lyndsay explained, a nuclear power station. There is much, much more I could say, many wonderful memories of which Lyndsay was a very calm and integral part. Thank you.
One thing often leads to another, and so it was that the Culture Club led on from the walking route. I am sure, like me, those of you who are not members of the Culture Club would love to join after you have heard Jennifer explain what it involves.
someone would suggest an activity, film, theatre, concert, opera, or whatever. And afterwards, we would assemble at that person's house to discuss the event. But the discussion would be accompanied by wine and cheese and nibbles and so on, to the point where the food and drink were sometimes often more interesting than the actual culture bit. Along with the rest of us, Lyndsay threw himself into these occasions with gusto. The first rule of the Culture Club was that whatever event was suggested, even and especially if it was outside our normal comfort zone, we would endeavour to participate. Thus, we went to the greyhound races, we learned how to play poker, we had a beetle drive, we enjoyed whiskey tasting, and had a cheese party where 43 different cheeses were produced. I remember an unusual event put on by Lyndsay and Torna when they come back from Italy that year, which was an olive oil tasting. We sat around dipping pieces of bread into little labelled bowls of olive oil, comparing the colour and pepperiness of the oils, and reminiscing about Italian holidays. Lyndsay and Torn together were food and wine enthusiasts. And many of us, definitely including myself, enjoyed being educated. Lyndsay, as you have been told, was an enthusiastic choir singer, and over the years we went to several of his concerts. Perhaps our finest hour as a culture club was the occasion when we were queuing to get into Lyndsay's choir concert in the local church, having agreed to meet afterwards for wine and cheese at Lyndsay's nearby. Naturally, most of us were clutching a bottle to contribute. You guessed. Sad to relate, one of these bottles, a red, slipped through its bag and crashed to the floor, spreading a red pool of alcohol onto the flags in the church foyer. The warmer the evening got, the more the smell rose throughout the church, and presumably the more the stain on the flags deepened. We never knew if Lyndsay owned up to having these very dubious friends. The final culture club we enjoyed with Lyndsay was the screening of Nuts in May by Mike Lee, filmed in 1964, which reminded many of us of our early camping trips with very basic equipment, some of which Torna and Lyndsay actually recognised on the screen. It was another lovely evening among friends, a memory lane moment for many of us. Another occasion where we all celebrated over 20 years of friendship, which Lyndsay was so much a part of. We're hoping we've got that video, so let's just see if it appears, and then we'll do our last thing.
New Zealand. We're enough to be with you all today. This beautiful celebration of Lyndsay's life. My thoughts and hearts go out to you, Torna, Hans, Peter, Anne-Marie and Philip. Father Don Edmund's cousin and relationship really.
Dodgy cable, I think. Bear with us.
Your memory.
carry on and then try and do it again. I did tell you that the culture club sounded like much fun. After all, it seems that wine and food are a big part. Equally so, but probably at the opposite end of the scale, with its back to basics camping, is Cwmnioy. But I will leave Elizabeth to share that with you all.
Hello everybody, it's lovely to be here with all your family. Very special. Can you hear me now? Now, many of you will have heard Lyndsay and his family refer to special gatherings.
Not here.
Let's move this.
This Right, I'll start again. Is that all right? Many of you will have heard Lyndsay and his family refer to special gatherings in Cwmnioy, a tiny hamlet in a beautiful Welsh valley leading up to the majestic ruins of London Priory. You may well have seen one of the photographs of the areas in the archway of this lovely priory. For those who don't know the full story, I will put you in the picture briefly. Back in the early 1970s, my family and I were living in St Denis Road, Selio, where we became good friends with our neighbours. Among them were Lyndsay Torner and family, and several other families in the same road, some of whom are here today. We were a close group of friends, babysitting for each other and enjoying activities together with our young children. One summer in the mid-1970s, two of these families, the Rolls and the Betts, Tony Rolls is here today, and I'm Elizabeth Betts, we were camping in Crickhowell in Wales, and in our exploration of the surrounding area, we ventured up the picturesque and beautiful Earwarker Valley. As we motored up the narrow winding road towards Cwmnioy, we spied a field by a river, which we thought would be ideal for pitching our tents on a future occasion. We duly approached the farmer, Mr. Collins of Noyath Farm, to ask if we might camp in his field the following year. He agreed, so we duly came back for the spring bank holiday in 1976, bringing with us a few other families from Birmingham, some of whom are here today also, including Torner and Lyndsay and family. The rest is history, in that we and many of our friends and families have continued to gather in the valley over the next 50 years. Even though some of the original campers subsequently happened to move to Hampshire, me as well, we still all made our annual pilgrimage to this beautiful valley. I say pilgrimage advisedly, because Cwmnioy has become the focus of our continued friendship over the years, with the tradition started by the elders now having passed to the next generation, and will hopefully be passed to the one below that. The campsite has had to move further up the valley when Noyath Farm was no longer available, and is now at Capelly Finn, just beyond the priory, and it is thanks to two families in particular, Rachel and Dom, who are here today, and Alistair and Flo, I don't know if they... Oh. To those two families, thanks to them, because they have managed to find a new site and continue to organise the setting up of the annual camp. The numbers have grown over the years, as friends have brought along their friends, many of whom return again and again to this special valley. The annual gathering gives us a sense of togetherness, where we enjoy the peaceful surroundings, bluebells in the woods, the froth of hawthorn blossom on the hillsides, the bleating of sheep, the call of the cuckoo, and Lyndsay in particular enjoyed the trilling of the skylarks high above the ridge of Offers Dyke Cookville, and you will have heard these sounds echoed informed William's beautiful lark ascending as we entered the crematorium. The same rituals are still observed. Walks up to Offa's Dyke or along the valley to the Priory, where welcome refreshments are available. Visits to the crooked little church of St. Martin's overlooking our original campsite. And most important of all is the traditional lamb roast over the fire on Sunday evening. There are many helpers to gather wood for the fire and supervise the cooking of the lamb. Jacket potatoes are piled into the embers, and tables and chairs are lined up in the field for the feast, sometimes under awnings if the weather is unkind. But we were blessed this year with a very warm and sunny evening, perfect for our 50th anniversary celebrations. So now you will understand why the Cumyoy family means so much to the Earwarkers and to all of us meeting every year to enjoy each other's company in such a delightful setting. In fact, even last year, Lyndsay was able to take part in the gathering, settled in his chair in the field with some of the campus, while others went off walking. We previously celebrated 40 years of fun and friendship by installing a stone bench in the churchyard at Cumyoy. And this year, we celebrated 50 years of our annual gathering, especially remembering Lyndsay with affection and the many years which he had been with us in this special valley.
Going to try and just have the audio from that video if we can.
By this video from New Zealand. I'm sorry not to be with you all today to share in this beautiful celebration of Lyndsay's life. My thoughts and hearts go out to you, Torna, Hans, Peter, and Marie, and Philip, and your families. Lyndsay was my father's, Don Edmund's cousin, and they had a close relationship all their lives. In the 1940s, Lyndsay's parents and my grandmother ran a poultry farm at Ranuri in West Auckland. Lyndsay, along with my dad, the Burton brothers and Russell Henderson, spent their childhood playing outside in the country, riding their home-built trolleys down to the bottom end of Simpson's Road. Lyndsay attended Swanson School, Avondale College, and then Auckland University. In this era, it was a significant feat to attend university, and Lyndsay was the only one of the Cowrie family in this generation to do so. By the time Lyndsay was attending university, his mother and grandma retired to Parnell. And like at Ranuri, we always had a special family gatherings. Lyndsay was slightly older than all us younger cousins, but he always made time to join in. We spent so many hours playing board games, walking along the sewage pipes at Shore Road, and swimming at Judges Bay. When Lyndsay left for Canberra to further his study, we all dressed up in our Sunday best and lined up at the cyclone netting fence at Whenuapai Airdrome to farewell him. Little did his mother know he would meet the charming Danish Torna and end up settling in England. When I travelled in England in 1976, the Earwarkers and Torna made me feel so welcome. They always had an open door and a home full with lots of visitors, despite having very young children. I have very fond memories of the weekends walking along the canals in Birmingham and eating wonderful banquets. A very special bond was formed. Lyndsay and the Torna and the children trekked back to New Zealand for regular trips. You always made an effort to connect with myself, my two girls, and Lyndsay's extended family. My dad always enjoyed your visits and the arrival of your annual Christmas card, that we have such wonderful memories. These last couple of weeks have been lovely. The many phone calls and messages between the cousins reminiscing on special memories with you. Lastly, I'd like to acknowledge Torna and your children for the care that you have given Lyndsay over the last couple of years. You have done so with such love and compassion. We will miss you greatly, Lyndsay. Love, Dorothy.
For many years, the Earwarkers undertook their many amazing ventures in a VW camper van. Every trip was meticulously planned and timetabled by Lyndsay. Driving the VW was easy for Lyndsay. After all, he had first taken his test in New Zealand and then had to take it again in America in a large station wagon. The first thing he was asked to do was to reverse park, and he was so good at it that he passed his test there and then. Having been their family car for 11 years, when Lyndsay and Torna joined forces to buy a house in France, it was time to say goodbye to the VW camper van, as sadly it couldn't make it up the mountain to the house. Tony and her husband Chris were one of the couples they joined forces with. As we will hear now, that house was a place where many wonderful memories were made, and Lyndsay was able to use his many skills to help to create a beautiful place to stay.
Hi. Don't worry, it's not long, you'll get acquainted soon. So in 1990, three couples who'd met in that muddy field in Cumioy, the Earwarkers, the Perrots and Rolls, bought a house together in Freewood, a tiny 18th century hamlet sheltering from avalanches in a narrow valley 4,000 feet up in the French Alps, on the edge of the Vanoise National Park. And some of you who are here today have been there. I think it would be hard to understate the central part with Fribourg, its renovation of the traditional old village house, the mountains, the shared and individual experiences played in Lyndsay's life and in the lives of the three families and their friends for over 20 years. It's still part of the Perrot family, and they still generously share it with us. Every year we had a week's working party together, apart from the other times we used the house separately. The stone house had a low, dark, vaulted ground floor where the animals had lived during the long months of snow, keeping the human occupants warm in their tiny living room with its open fire which was alongside, and in their small bunk room above. The rest of the slate-roofed, heavy-beamed building was one enormous hayloft. Slowly, year by year, the families and their friends worked to wire, to plumb, and to construct. I see Lyndsay in the sun outside with Hans Peter, carefully measuring and cutting wood. Philip talked earlier about Lyndsay's earnestness, and I see that in everything he did there. I see him meticulously placing stone around windows with Torna, panelling walls with wooden strips in the bathroom, raising heavy beams, fitting sheets of plasterboard over insulation in the ceilings of new bedrooms with Anne-Marie, puzzling over wires with Philip. And then I see him as part of the long lunches in the shade, enjoying the cold beer, the wonderful cheese, and discussing what would come next. And in the evenings, after a day's work, when sometimes we needed a fire, I see him enjoying a glass of wine, perhaps eating pasta that Torna had made during the day and draped everywhere to dry. But always he was relishing his food around the long table and commenting on the local produce, and often with a dry, humorous story to tell. Of course, there were many weeks spent there in all seasons just enjoying the place, listening to the river rushing by 10 yards away, hardly ever remembering that our raw sewage was emptying into it, also 10 yards away. Except the summer that Lyndsay and Torna had it brought home to them very forcibly when it stopped emptying while they were on holiday. In the autumn, they would watch, and we would all watch the Bukatan descending. We would watch the stars as we had never seen them anywhere before. They would pick wild strawberries and raspberries and glory in the wildflowers and see the valley transformed by snow. Lyndsay loved walking in the mountains, and I walk with him sometimes and see him now in many of the places I have loved as well. He delighted in their incredible beauty and in their plants and animals, and his increasing knowledge of them over the years and in their different seasons. The life and people of the village were also important to him. Only 2 and then 1 of the 20 or so dwellings in that hamlet were occupied for the whole year, but the other second homeowners are still an interesting mixture of French, Belgians and Dutch. And we gradually got to know and socialise with them and become part of village life. But Torna and Lyndsay were also particularly good at exploring locally and really finding out interesting places and events that they relished. Torna and Lyndsay made a great leap of faith when they joined in the purchase of Freebush. Like all close relationships, it had its ups and downs, but the family have stayed close friends and would all reckon that Freebush has been and was for Lyndsay one of the most important experiences of their life.
I'm sure you've seen you've got a bottle of wine each on the table. Could somebody open it and could you start pouring some of your wine glasses for me while I tell this? Thank you. Fraser was the older brother of Campbell and Josephine, whose memories I shared at the start of Lyndsay's celebration. Fraser had other older friends further up the road from the Earwarker's farm. That was the Babbage family, and they are still there, growing their vines and bottling their wine. In fact, it is the oldest family-owned winery in New Zealand. Each time Lyndsay and Torna would visit New Zealand, they would visit the winery and say hello to Maureen Babbage, who was in the same class as Lyndsay. So the bottles you are now pouring from come from Lyndsay's favourite winery, just a short distance from where his life began. As we bring the celebration of his life to a close, now you have your glasses charged, would you please stand as we celebrate all the wonderful memories that you made with Lyndsay. And we raise a toast to Lyndsay. Lindsay.